the central bank just buys more government bonds, and then commercial banks issue more loans because rates are lower, etc. But there was stimulus directly given to people.
You mentioned earlier that during COVID, 40% of all US dollars in circulation were created.
The biggest problem that I see is that entitlement culture is strong in my generation, maybe even more so than in others.
If we assume that AI and other technologies lead to human labor being less and less involved in the process of its production, that is a great opportunity for a country like Germany to on-ramp production facilities again.
When it comes to agriculture, when it comes to basic manufacturing, there is a case to be made that just also for the sake of your own national stability, you want to reshore some of these things.
Max, we're on a journey. It's called Odyssey, and we're going to explore how to build products on the internet, in crypto, with AI in 2025, and how to utilize modern technology and what it means. But at the same time, we want to be thoughtful about what we are building, and we want to understand what's happening in the world and what is happening in the markets. Now, Trump's been elected. We're seeing tariffs, rate cuts by the central bank are being discussed. What do you think about all that?
Well, there's definitely a lot of stuff happening, Onur. In terms of the macro fear, I'd believe that most of it is overblown in the mid to long run, because virtually every macro outlook scenario, if you subtract P-doom, so the probability of annihilating our entire species, is going to be positive in the mid to long term. Blaming it on the midterm effects of Bidenomics or the short-term effects of Trump tariffs, pick your favorite political side, blame it on the other. I don't think it is justified in the fundamentals.
What is the sentiment in the markets right now from your perspective? What are you sensing? What are you reading? What are the information that are trickling down to your feeds?
Sentiment is very mixed. There is fear and uncertainty side. People are debating, is globalization over? How much substance is there actually to all of these companies? Ever since COVID, we have seen the biggest run-up in financial markets, especially in equities. In the past 12 months, gold has also been keeping up a lot. We've seen the crypto cycle in 2021 and a little bit in 2024. It's very hard to form conviction on anything right now. Some people are fearing a recession. These fears have been around ever since there was a brief one in 2022. But yeah, overall, just very mixed, very uncertain, no clear direction, depending on who you ask.
Yeah. I would say what's interesting is there's been a short period of euphoria after Trump was elected, and then things normalized again. And I think that was kind of the expected. One of my assumptions was, regardless of who wins, it will probably converge to the same result over a long enough period of time. I think the only volatility was short-term. So we are probably slowly coming out of that phase. But one thing I'm very curious about and interested in is, in our previous conversation, you've mentioned COVID has been a tipping point in the global economy to several different degrees. I think one thing that is being discussed over and over is the increase in the money supply, but also other things that has changed. What do you think has changed? And how would you judge those changes from today's perspective?
Within the last 5 years? Well, I mean, it's not a binary change from 0 to 1 we've seen in the last 5 years, but it has been irreversible confirmation of many trends that have been going on over the past 15 years. If you look at the dependency on inevitably going back to QE and having to bail out large financial players, that has started manifesting in the 2008-2009 housing crisis. After that, it became clear that unless you really embrace austerity, financial responsibility, it is very hard to not bullwhip spiral these effects out in the mid to long term. With COVID, you have repeated this dynamic, obviously with a completely different background and different reasons, but the outcome has been similar. Every large player got bailed out or profited disproportionately from all the money printing. We've seen a huge rise in the equity markets in 2021 until 2022. And then also 23, 24 have also been pretty for equities. And you have to ask yourself, well, is that rise in prices supported by any substance? Is the entire global economy improving on a fundamental level that corresponds to these price increases, or is it not? You also have to consider, where does the printed or created money flow? It's not actually printed with a printer, but if you lower rates. Governments can much easier finance deficits, also extend the rates outward, and issue more treasuries, and commercial banks can issue loans for lower costs. So a vast amount of money is created on their side, and that trickles down mostly into assets. So if you are already in the upper economic class, if you're already holding assets, you have profited disproportionately over the past 5 years. If you've been working class, had a job, maybe even in hospitality, past 5 years have been pretty bad for you, and there's not really any on the horizon perspective that it will get significantly better.
That's so interesting. Just to put everything a little bit into context. So we're exploring the markets, we're exploring what the current state of AI enables and what it means with regards to productivity and margins. And we're exploring new technologies such as cryptocurrencies. And along the way, we're going to have experts. One thing I'm very curious to do a deep dive in a future episode is deep understanding of the different layers of money, all the way from central bank money to commercial bank money, to the process of increasing bank reserves, to the process of the government issuing bonds and the participant auctioning on bonds, to the process of like how that affects the ability to issue loans due to higher reserves in the central bank. I think it's pretty complex, but at the same time, I think we can probably simplify it down enough so people actually understand what printing money means, because as you said, it doesn't mean that physical cash, the circulation of cash is increased necessarily. It's usually on the accounting side, on the balances side, that some virtual money supply increases. But we're going to do a deep dive on that. That is super interesting. To come back to today, which is an exploration of the current zeitgeist of macro. I have two questions. First of all, are you bullish or are you bearish in March 2025? And my second question is, isn't it all just a Ponzi?
These questions are somewhat intertwined. Whether I'm bullish or bearish depends on the time horizon. Also, you have to separate between being bullish on asset prices and being bullish on like the actual development of our species. As I hinted on before, my base case is that almost every macro scenario that is going to play out, minus the probability of doom, is going to be long-term positive for our species as a whole. My base case assumption is technology and technological progress is going to continue and is going to improve. And there's at least some correlation with that corresponding to improvement in the quality of life. You can see that in life expectancy. You'll ideally also find better metrics to measure like the fulfillment and satisfaction of people with their lives. And I'm generally optimistic for that. And in the case of P-Doom, which the only immediate one we have to worry about right now is nuclear war, and the only conflict that could spiral into such immediately would be the Russia-Ukraine conflict, because enough parties which are nuclearly armed are directly or indirectly involved there. Unless that happens, my outlook is pretty positive on the mid to long run. And if P-Doom should happen, I don't really care about macro, and I don't think anybody should care about macro. Like, if we have 30 minutes left as a species, I don't care what Bitcoin does, what the S&P does, or what gold does. I ideally make it to some bunker, and we'll see from there. On the whether I'm bullish on the asset pricing and versus actual growth and improvement side, and that is transitioning over to the is it all just a Ponzi question? Not all of it, but I would argue that the majority of jobs right now and the majority of companies right now are not creating any fundamental value that is essential to everyday life. Take accountants, for example. If take HR, take everything that is involved with taxes and legal and compliance and many of these administrative functions, they're not building anything productive.
Yeah. That is, so first of all, to put it in context, we're not diminishing or belittling any of these occupations.
Yeah. It's not like everybody of them is useless. They are useful within the given mechanics they operate in. But in the large scale of things, at the bottom line, what is useful? Agriculture,
yes,
construction.
I'm going to give a different example. The easy way to think about this is the following. If the entire tax system would be simplified and digitalized in a way where accountants aren't needed anymore because everything happens on a transactional level and is done, right? That would free up a ton of brain capacity from bright people to actually work on something productive for the society.
100%.
So that's what we're saying. And the other thing, it's the same with financial markets or traders. It's the same with management consultants that optimize processes. I want to touch on the management consulting thing. I mean, we've been consultants ourselves, so I can speak freely here. Think of two companies. Company A that purchases something, and company B, which is the supplier or vendor. If company A now has a team of people, consultants, that optimize the procurement process to purchase cheaper and reduce the costs by 10%, then, from a perspective of the company, that company has a 10% lower cost basis, let's say. Again, everything is simplified. But guess what? From a macroeconomic perspective, it's a zero-sum game, because the other company now, which is the vendor, has 10% lower income, at least for this specific purchase. So it's a zero-sum game. Like, the economy doesn't gain anything. There's no net gain in productivity for the economy as a whole. Understanding that and thinking about, okay, what are the actual things that produce value and that are net positive for the economy? This is what we're talking about, right? All of us have worked on things that were completely useless, just to put it in perspective.
Largely agree. I think we should have a deep dive into the whole zero sum versus positive sum dynamics within any given economy. One last thing to add to that topic is that everybody's so concerned and afraid of AI is going to lead to unemployment. There is no nobility in being employed in a useless gig. There's no nobility to that. There's no inherent societal value to it. It would be such a liberation for mankind if suddenly you didn't have 10% of the working population or 30% in first world countries in these useless low-level white-collar jobs. I don't care whether people work hard, go work on something useful. Do something that is genuinely fulfilling and genuinely of use. Go build something. Don't just reallocate and shift and extract, and don't really do anything and don't even be able to describe what you do. Yeah, I am a management consultant. I do like frameworks on the process improvement of whatever. Nobody cares. Nobody implements it anyway. You're an overpaid PowerPoint monkey.
So would you consider yourself Gen Z?
Yes. I was born in 01, 5 days before 9/11. So I pretty much fit every Gen Z stereotype you can.
I think that's interesting. The way you speak about it, it's kind of refreshing that Gen Z doesn't care about job as a status anymore. I want to say two things. The other thing, to your point, is my dad used to say, son, what are you doing? This is just modern slavery. Do go your own thing and have fun. And I didn't understand at first, but I literally, after uni, I had one job and I was like, so are you telling me I'm gonna wear a suit, get up at 5 in the morning, jump into the train, go to some company, draw some PowerPoint and do some spreadsheets for the rest of my life, and that's my occupation? I was like, there's no way. Any type of work is honorable, and if people like it, fair game. But it's just such a waste of time for me. And it is modern slavery. Figuring out how to sustain yourself and your family while doing what you actually like, appreciate, and ideally it creates a net productive positive sum for the economy is kind of the ideal outcome. That's one thing. The other thing is I'm very bullish on Gen Z, to be honest. People say, oh, they don't care about status, they don't care about their jobs, they're not disciplined enough to do a job for multiple years. That's probably fair if you look at the averages, but I think that's a good thing. People should not identify with the status of their job. Who cares about that?
Yeah, it depends. I would disagree that occupational status is irrelevant for my generation. There are still enough people in the traditional career paths, and even if you do something on your own, you're still to a large extent doing that for the gain of status, besides the gain of money and the gain of fulfillment. So I don't think that this has declined in a disproportionate sense. The perception of status has just shifted. I agree with you that I'm pretty bullish on this generation. There are many valid critiques about my generation's behavior, societal degeneracy, and all of these things where we have our fair share of contribution. The biggest problem that I see is that entitlement culture is strong in my generation, maybe even more so than in others. But the upside that I see and the big opportunity that I see where our generation can improve and shift paradigms of the past 2 to 3 generations of the 20th century is that all of these societal lies, and I'm not using lie as a derogatory term here, but these concepts of society that have been implicitly or explicitly enforced to just keep up the illusion of safety and stability, no matter what you tell a Gen Z person, they can all see through it. Because they've, from a young age, have gained so much exposure to like just seeing how the world works, what happens through the internet. Like it is also interconnected. And to some extent, it's certainly overwhelming. Like I'm not saying that this is solely a positive development, but it has exposed so many dynamics in the entire society that have been artificially upheld over the past decades. And I think there's a chance for genuine change there.
Yeah, I agree with you. Maybe to come back to the topic of the macro zeitgeist, one thing I'm very curious about, especially in the context of what changed after COVID in recent years, in recent history, or how do you think about globalization versus localization? When I grew up, it was all about globalization. It basically just got started. It didn't just get started, but you know what I mean? Like it was on a trajectory that everything in the future is going to be globalized. Everything in the world is going to be intertwined. And one thing that we're seeing now is the opposite trend. It's like, oh, like support your local government, your local city, your local community, your local farmers, your local market. So what do you think, where do you think we're heading right now?
It's a huge topic, which many people touch upon tangentially when they discuss macro, but it is rarely discussed explicitly. My personal opinion is, and again, I'm not a macro expert, I just observe what is happening in the markets just like you. What I am seeing is that post 1990 until COVID, so for around 30 years, you had that globalization euphoria. When the Cold War ended, we had no more ideological duopoly in the world. There was a hyper-liberalization of the free West. Everything got globalized. And, I mean, globalization has yielded us some pretty good outcomes. I think on average, 150,000 people every single day have been lifted above the extreme poverty line of $2 per day. 150,000 people every day have been lifted above that poverty line from 1990 until 2020 on average. That is such a huge improvement for these people in terms of expected age and life expectancy and all of these metrics. And it's enabled a huge uprise of second world countries. Third world countries have moved into the order of second world countries. We've been able to access goods, especially like technological goods and electronics, as cheaply as never before. Imagine if TVs and laptops all had to be produced in Germany. It would be extremely expensive compared to how it is now. But on the other hand, you've introduced a bunch of underrated side effects that have only manifested itself ever since the 2010s and that have been exposed by COVID, where suddenly the entire global economy and global trade got shut down. Minimum for 2 weeks in some nations, but for most nations for months and for years, it has been ramped down so heavily that many of these dependencies and the fragility introduced by this hyper-complex system have been exposed. So now we suddenly have an incentive again to reconsider, well, is it worth optimize for globalization for the sake of globalization for everything? And arguably, it's not. If it's very specialized goods, very specialized manufacturing, think chips, TSMC.
Yeah.
That's a prime example. You cannot produce that locally in every country, but especially when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to basic manufacturing, there is a case to be made that for the sake of your own national stability, you want to reshore some of these things. And geopolitically, we're also coming back to a meta of, okay, let's maybe settle down with the illusion of like rainbow humanism everywhere and everybody loves each other, which is just not the case in the world. Like, I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's just an observation. And we are returning more to an interest-driven geopolitics and like external politics.
Okay. I would like to unpack a few things that you said. Let me start with on-ramping and off-ramping production capacity and the switching costs of that. One thing to take into account is the lag between making a decision to on and off ramp, especially if you on ramp production capacities, to actual time to production, time to value, because maybe people need to be educated, maybe facilities need to be built up, maybe machines need to be configured, and so on and so forth. Those decisions are so significant. I wasn't aware of that previously, especially on a national level. If you go for a certain policy that impacts something as significant as production facilities, that's a pretty big deal. And that is something generations may feel the impact on still. The other thing I want to comment on is you mentioned Germany, for example, as a country to produce certain things. Let's even take chips. So something is changing right now, which is basically the reason why outsourcing certain pieces of production is cheaper in, for example, as China is, labor is obviously significantly cheaper in China. But at the same time, China has logistically mastered being able to provide facilities and production capacities that require super specialized machines and you name it. However, one thing, that I know is the less labor is involved in a process and the more it is automated by machines, and let's say it's 95-98% machine production, the cheaper Germany becomes, to the extent that it is cheaper than China, just because you don't have tariffs and you don't have the logistics of shipping stuff with the container or with other means. So that being said, one interesting opportunity is if we assume that AI and other technologies lead to human labor being less and less involved in the process of especially production, but also other processes, that is actually a great opportunity for a country like Germany to on-ramp production facilities again. On the labor side, sure, there's always going to be Eastern European, China, where things will be produced cheaper. Or for textile, you go to India, you go to Turkey, you go down south. But I think for machine optimized production, it could be an opportunity.
100%, but that unfortunately only considers one leg of the problem. Because in every economy, on a super high level, two basic inputs you have is human capital and energy. And with AI, we can fix a lot of the human capital issues. But if you look at the energy costs in Germany and these blatant mistakes that have been committed ever since exiting nuclear energy in Germany, like, we are just not competitive at that level. I mean, if I can just set up a facility, put a bunch of AI or robots controlled by AI in there, why wouldn't I build it in like Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, where first of all, my building costs are going to be cheaper because I have all of these commodities and resources there, and I can get energy for 6 or 7 cents for the kilowatt hour, whereas I pay 30 cents in Germany, or how much is it? I don't know.
I mean, for industry, it's cheaper. There's also a bunch of taxes that you can get exemptions from as a company, especially if you're in high tech. The other thing is energy isn't fungible, so it has to be available at your production facility. I agree with you generally. In my opinion as well, there have been mistakes have been made.
Wallet I control.
In a
In a state household I control.
nation I control. However, what point was I going to make? Lost my thought of trail.
In Germany versus Kazakhstan.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of innovation, I think, in the energy sector in general. But Germany's business model, it was the simplest business model ever. You have access to cheap energy from Russia. It's dirt cheap. You produce cars and you export them. In a nutshell, that was Germany's business model. You can take machines and add them on top of cars.
Chemicals to...
Sure, weapons to some extent. But that was the business model. So I think like ruining the energy part, knowing that this is your core business model, was an interesting move, to say the least. But we're not touching politics, at least for now.
We should do a deep dive into how can we get ourselves out of this. Like,
Yes.
how in the 21st century can you cheaply access energy? There's a lot of mixed opinions about hydrogen, about nuclear fusion or whatever that thing is. We should probably cover each of these sources.
Yes.
Because it's such a huge input into every economy at some point in time in this series.
Let's do that. All right. We're slowly approaching the end of this episode. In the middle or in the beginning of the episode, we touched on the increase in money supply and the money printing. You mentioned earlier that during COVID, 40% of all US dollars in circulation were created. Again, not printed, but created on the balance sheet. Why did that happen? And what's the impact of that?
Well, let's start with the why. So by shutting down the entire global economy, a lot of companies were in very deep trouble. And as a government, you have an incentive to not let your national economy crash, because not only would that hurt the companies and the resilience of your nation, but it would also hurt the individual people. It would be politically not very popular if you just let the entire ship sink. So you have an incentive to use whatever possible in stimulating the economy, quantitative easing, so that companies can get access to very cheap loans to maybe bridge that period of a couple of months of downregulated activity. And in the US especially, while Trump was still in office in 2020, one of the rare occasions you have seen direct stimulus to the individual. So it was not flowing, okay, the central bank just buys more government bonds and then commercial banks issue more loans because rates are lower, etc. But there was stimulus directly given to people. And that is something that had a huge impact on fueling that whole 2021 speculation bubble and what has continued ever since in sports betting, in crypto, because now you had all of that helicopter money being dropped to you, and yeah, you could spend it on stuff. And since you weren't allowed to go out for dinner or any entertainment or whatever, you had more money on the side anyway. You couldn't spend it for anything else. So that is one of these chain reactions that got initiated by COVID, one of the things that has changed since then. And yeah, just to briefly touch upon the dynamic of money creation. So you as a government, you issue government bonds. There's the central bank, which buys quite a bit of them. And then you also have a lot of pension funds or a lot of mutual funds that have a legal requirement to have X percentage of their total AUM allocated to these things. That is on the bond side to fund your government deficit, which arises due to more government spending, to contractors, welfare state, all of these things. And then on the commercial bank side, if rates drop, you are able to give out cheaper loans. So on the private side, which is enterprises, firms, and also individuals, you're now able to easier access a loan than before when rates are higher. It's easier to finance real estate on credit, to take out a credit for your business, to finance operations, to grow, and all of these things. And again, if you have that on such a uniform and such an exaggerated level, you have to ask yourself, well, does that continue into infinity? And is there actual substance to that growth? Is that growth sustainable in the long run, or is it just a short-lived phenomenon? And yeah, we've seen quite a few repercussions ever since. I mean, all the typical bear posters and people who want to spread panic about macro, they have been on their toes ever since 2020. Because, I mean, on the bottom line, the dynamics we've seen ever since, it is absurd. It is absurd what has happened. But until the fiat monetary system and like the economic system collapses, they are on the wrong side. And like the defendants of modern monetary theory and all of these things are on the right. It doesn't matter whether the system makes sense on like a fundamental mathematical level, if it's like coherent and all of that. Until it breaks down, it is very hard to criticize it towards the believers.
I would add that all these higher level concepts, such as MMT or any other school of how to view the world, they're just lenses through which to look at things, and they're a set of principles rather than an operationalized plan to execute and a set of actions. I think this is how I view those things. Max, it's been a blast talking to you. We've been yapping for half an hour, so I think we'll leave that here. But like you said, let's dive deeper into some of these topics. Let's bring in experts, and let's just try to figure out what's going on. And last but not least, let's also understand what that means for each of us. Like, how do we position ourselves? What do we need to do? Is there any educational path we should take? Is there any like step in the portfolio you should position yourself with? So I think these are the questions that are in my head, or especially for also the family. What does it mean for the younger generation? What are the things that will matter that kids and younger people should look into? And like we said in the beginning, that they also enjoy doing and having fun. Speaking of having fun, I had a ton of fun today with you. So thanks a lot, Max, and talk to you next time.
See you in the next one, Onur.